Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the joint board meeting with the Cincinnati Public School Board and the Preschool Promise negotiating team. Welcome, everyone. Ask everyone in the audience to silence their cell phones and electronic devices. Ms. Wagner, would you call our roll, please?
Present.
Here.
Here. I'm not sure for the Preschool Promise side. Is there an attendance taking protocol that you all have?
We take our role. We have Terry England and me here from our Master Agreement Committee right now. We're expecting Sally Westheimer and Marcia Futel as well. We also have some of our key staff with us. We have Tara Fisher-Jackson, Hector Polanco, and Jake Purcell.
All right. Well, welcome again, everyone. Folks who had a chance to see our agenda know that we have at least two important topics we're going to talk about this morning. And I think before I get too far into any of that, I just wanted to invite our Friends of Preschool Promise. Is there anything that you all would like to share by way of opening?
Sure. Thanks, Ben. I appreciate that. We're grateful to be here today, and we thank you for your time and getting this set out on the calendar. We have long been looking forward to trying to revise the original master agreement in the way that is best for CPS and CPP and for all of the children in the community. And we have certainly been working at it for a while now. We're grateful to be here. A few things that I shared with Ben that I spent my last night with split screen watching you all and watching the Bengals at the same time. And frankly, I thought, I told Ben, both made me happy. I appreciate hearing your thoughtful discussion on our draft last night and on what you want to accomplish today. And thought it would be helpful on our end to frame kind of for you all and for the public how we perceive the last little while. A lot of talk last night about kind of wanting to explore the history and the shared vision and also what's transpired over the last little while, and then talk about the future. So as far as how we perceive things, and I will share with you as far as perspective of who you've got in the room, every one of our board members that's here has been pretty intimately involved in Preschool Promise from the beginning. I know you all had discussions about there's some new folks and some old folks and those things. Every one of our board members has been pretty intimately involved from the beginning in some capacity. And also our CEO knows it all better than any of us do because she lives and breathes it every day. So our team is pretty well steeped in the history. And as far as where we have landed in the last little while, went back and checked in preparation for this meeting. It was 613 days ago that we provided you all the first proposed rewrite of the master agreement. We didn't get very far on it, and we don't really want to belabor the point as to why. But as far as where our board sees things, and I'm not sure a board has ever been more unified about anything than our board is about wanting to get a finalized agreement as quickly as possible, one that can be successful for everyone. We had a kind of failed attempt a while back, I would say, and we have re-engaged in the discussions over the last 2 months or so. In those discussions, we had a small group meet to work on revisions to the draft, which is exactly how we did the original one. For perspective for all of you, the original master agreement was drafted after the vote by the voters, by a small group of staff, board members, and attorneys, and then approved by both boards. And that is the process that we have sought to emulate in revising it. And our small group has met for the last 2 months or so, and we've been really grateful for the willingness to meet, the participation. I will tell you, and Ben, I want to say this publicly, that having a counterpart who you know as someone has enormous integrity helps a lot in any discussion, and you've certainly been that, and I appreciate it. And we have worked to discuss the shared vision and changes that we believe are important for the shared vision, and also revisions to the master agreement. Generally speaking, as it pertains to the shared vision, the discussion has come to, we have made a lot of progress. When we first negotiated a master agreement, there wasn't even such a thing as preschool promise. Now we have a very strong board, an even stronger staff, and a great team and a great operating history. You all have also expanded your preschool in incredible ways and provided a valuable experience for students. Our discussion has really been on two things as far as the shared vision and what's worked well and what we have thought there should be changes. One has been, we want both sides to have, I don't like using both sides, I'm sorry, I won't do that. We want CPS and CPP, both partners, to have the most flexibility possible permitted by policy and law and proper safeguards for transparency and proper public purpose to maximize the funds for the remainder of this levy in the way that will create the best experience of quality preschool for students. I know I said this in a letter to you all, but I want to reiterate for purposes of this discussion that about 3/4 of the students that Preschool Promise funds become CPS kindergartners. So I don't really believe in a us versus them mentality or view on this. Frankly, most of the students that you all invest in through us become your kindergartners, become your third graders, become your students. So, but we have sought trying to maximize flexibility for both groups. I think, frankly, one of my biggest personal criticism of the original master agreement, it is sought to tie. It's not really two different systems because we have multiple systems within our system, but it's been to tie systems together and treat them all the same, even though they're run differently. Dr. Moffitt, I heard you discuss that last night, and I appreciated that nuance. I want to thank you too, because you came to one of our board meetings recently to learn more, and hearing you discuss some of that nuance last night, I appreciate it a lot. And so we wanted to figure out a way to kind of create the maximum flexibility for all parties to best deploy funds for the success of preschool students. And then the other item, and Brandon has spent a lot of time focused on this, which I appreciate, is making sure that for the duration of this levy, we don't overspend, and that we set aside money from the levy, from the renewal, and that we need to come up with a system to best make sure that we're fiscally responsible with those funds. So we have not discussed any grand departures from the shared vision in those small groups. The two big changes we've proposed are a mechanism to make sure that we're not overspending, because right now the current master agreement doesn't really have that. And a mechanism to try to provide the most flexibility possible for both CPS and CPP to best deploy funds. We sent over a draft 54 days ago that we thought was the best way to go about approaching that, a draft of the master agreement. We got your blue line, as I think it was discussed as last night, at about 9 p.m. So we've had it for about 12 hours. I slept for about 6 of them. From our initial review, and I'd be lying if I said we had had much time as a group to discuss it, we've had none. We think it is a very workable draft. We're not prepared to say, yes, we want to accept every single change as is and vote and call it a day, but we think we're probably 95% of the way there and where we want to be, and that we have a goal of getting this over the finish line as quickly as we're able to. And Superintendent, I want to thank you, because last night I heard you reiterate that as well, and that that was something that we've expressed and that you've been a partner on and wanting to help us finalize. So our hope for today is that we're able to discuss whatever historical things need to be discussed for the public and for our boards for discussion. In our small group, I don't know that there's been much, and I've listened to a lot of your board meetings. Have I heard much pushback on kind of this idea, the tweaks to the shared vision of flexibility for both parties as long as there's transparency and following all laws and procedures. Nor have I heard much pushback on it. We've got to set a mechanism to make sure we don't overspend the funds. No one's advocating doing that. And frankly, our hope is that we can get this master agreement finalized in a way that's successful for everyone quickly. And then to reconvene shortly thereafter to talk about the future, because ready or not, here we come on a renewal or whatever we're going to do next, and we want to start to have those discussions as well. So Ben, I thank you for the time and letting us open it and frame it in that way, and happy to move forward in whatever manner you best see fit.
Thank you very much. I'm used to Micah. We usually use Mr. Cameras in this room.
Just call me Micah, please.
It's going to just feel awkward and weird, and we're just going to roll with it for a little bit. But welcome. Glad everybody's here. I think, given our conversation last night, one of the things I wanted to make sure we had was some time to get on the table some historical context about the past ways these two groups have worked together, particularly for Carolyn, but we don't have her at the moment. So I think I'd like to do two things. One is if there's anything that our board would like either to ask about or to share as it relates to history, context, table setting, I think we could create a few minutes for that. I also, if we I've sent a message to Carolyn, if we pick her up later on, maybe we can create a few minutes there for her too. And then we can, I asked our Vice President, Mr. Craig, I know he and Ms. Futel had been working on some possible changes to a shared vision. That was our first item on the agenda. Once we've done some context setting, I thought we could maybe start there. But is there anything, Mrs. Weinberg, Dr. Moffitt, Ms. Bolton, Mr. Craig, anything anybody wants to ask about or would like to share as it comes to history and context of these two groups? Ms. Bolton?
Because I'm old. No, I wouldn't. I have no history piece. I think everybody at the table, everybody in this room has a fair amount of history. I just looking to the future, I do think is what should color our discussion in part, and whatever work product is produced, I think we have to understand that we have in 25 the possibility of a renewal and going before the public. So whatever we decide with this particular document or that particular document, all of this, as school boards have to be aware all the time, we're looking to having to go to the public. And so I think there's an interest in maintaining as well as adjusting, but most particularly knowing that this will be brought to the public for a vote in some way, shape, or form, either in its current size or less or more or in a different configuration of how many years. But that's, even though I'm Miss Historian, my eyes are right now on the future of getting things passed by the public, and knowing too that the school board in this district will probably be facing other requests as well to the public in the very near future. So that's what I'm focusing on. So thanks for the opportunity.
Thanks, Ms. Bolton. Dr. Moffitt.
I don't have a mic, so I'm wondering if that was on purpose to keep me from talking. But nonetheless,
I told him that.
it might have been that way, because I talk a lot. However, one of the things I want to make sure that I say publicly is that what's driving me, while we are faced with budget cuts and we are faced with having to make some pretty hefty decisions as a district, I really appreciate the fact, Mr. Cameras, not Micah, that you mentioned how long this process is taking, but the two things that you shared that I wrote down that I want to keep at the forefront is that we want to have the most flexibility, do this with respect and fidelity. And I want us to remember what is my focus is that we want to ensure that our students in the city, our preschoolers, get what they need. And so that is the drive. We may not agree on everything, wording, but whatever we do agree upon, whatever we come out of this with is going to impact thousands of little people. And so Ms. Brooks knows I call them the littles. That's what drives me. And I think that's what's going to focus all of these conversations towards progression as expeditiously as possible, because they're depending on it. And so when you say 75% become our CPS students, I'd love to get that number higher. And I think we can do that if we work together collectively and keep them first. So that's what's driving me. That's what's got me here at 9 o'clock on a Tuesday, taking time away from something else, because this is important. So I think that we've got a great group of people who also share that this is important. So let's get this done as expeditiously as possible for our little ones, because we do have money coming up. So that's what's driving me. And I'll get the mic back anytime I need it.
Thank you, Dr. Moffett. And it doesn't have to be just CPS people. I think if there's any context or history that people want to make sure we get on the table, another couple minutes on that is worth it. And if not, that's okay too. Great. Yes, Mr. Craig.
I'll share one thought, and I shared it with the working group as well, that I think, the reality is that what we put together when we initially created the levy, and that then ultimately funded the expansion of quality preschool, was a concept at the time in which there was no preschool promise, or Cincinnati preschool promise for that matter, right? And where we are now is at a point where we have to be able to also do the assessment of, we've done this for so long, whether or not what we're doing going forward needs to change or needs to adjust is a reality. I think to a certain extent, we have to kind of brag about the fact that we've been probably more successful than I think anyone at that time thought we would be with expanding access to preschool. That's a tremendous thing, and that's something that's phenomenal for all of the folks who have been able to benefit from it. But it also created a reality that the needs of what we envisioned when we put together the levy are probably exceeding where we thought we would be at this point. And so I think some of that is the reality of whatever we create, whatever we put together, has to be keeping in mind that the resources that we have for this are limited. The need isn't. And so in some ways, in some form or some fashion, we will not meet every person in the city's need for childcare with regard to, or for preschool. And that's unfortunate, right? Like, that's something that's truly unfortunate. That's something that we should be also getting our lovely state representatives on, and making sure that everyone outside of this agreement puts more effort and time into preschool. Because that's the reality that even if we had every unit filled, there's still spaces in our city where there's not enough preschool spots. It's not even about money, it's about spots in buildings and in facilities for the students that are there. And so I talked a little bit about this to people last night, that in some levels it's very personally about some of these things, because I've had friends who've come to the city for dire need, who is not about them not having the money or the resources to get into a preschool space, but it's about the fact that there was no spots within those preschool spots or preschool locations. We looked at the chart that Preschool Promise provided at the Budget and Finance Committee about areas where there are preschool deserts still within our city. And so I think whatever we create in this process has to be both cognizant of that fact, but also cognizant of the fact that we still have a limited set of resources to do that extreme amount of work. And so that may shape how we decide and how we think about this differently. That may shape how we build something differently, but it also is just something that we have to commit to the public when we go back out in 25 to say that this has been successful. This is why this is successful. This is why we still need to do more. Because we aren't getting the support that we would expect to get. We aren't getting the support that we know we should be getting from the state legislature to do this work. That's why some of this is actually even on the backs of our voters, is because we didn't get the long-term support. So I think it's just a reality that we have to sit with and balance the two competing interests. The interest of the need that's out there in the community, but also the interest of the resources that we have. That again, fair enough that we thought would be enough. That we're recognizing even in the last 2 years hasn't been enough, right? And so it's just a balancing point that I think we'll have to keep in mind throughout the entirety of the discussion.
This is the button.
Thank you very much, Mr. Craig. Others? Yes, please. Ms. Vitale.
Oh, okay. Good morning. So I'll be brief. I kind of want to piggyback on what Dr. Moffitt said. What's driving me on this effort is the same thing that drove me 8 years ago when it was first conceived. There was no precedent for what we have done in terms of creating this preschool expansion. And I can remember back then, there was no money. There was no organization. There was just an idea and a need that was expressed, and it kind of took off from there. And my own education journey with my own 3 children is what drove me to support this and still support this even at this point. So as a voter, I came into this thing as a voter and a taxpayer, and I still wear that hat, you know, even as we sit at the table and try to figure out how we're going to move forward. And the conversations were that this is good for kids, this is good for families, it's good for our community. And it was obvious that everybody believed that because of the tremendous support that was garnished in 2016 to get this levy passed. It was one of the biggest levies that CPS had asked for, because 33 million of that 48 million went directly to K through 12. So, but the preschool part was very near and dear to a lot of people's part because they understood the need to have this happen for our kids. You had every aspect of our community come together, even people who had been on opposite sides of many issues coming together, believing that this was right to do. I can appreciate the concern about the money. It's real. Who would have ever thought in 2016 that we would be in a worldwide pandemic 4 years later that not only devastated us financially in some respects, but also took the cover off of what was really happening with our kids and our families, the tremendous need to have this happen so that our kids can thrive educationally. The need for families to have a place, a safe place for their kids to come to school and to not only be cared for, but to learn. We learned that in 2020 with the pandemic. So I want to encourage us to find a pathway forward to not just solve the immediate problem of these documents, but to figure out a way to continue to move forward, because the need has not gone away. I think the voters, myself included, all of us at this table that was here that voted, have all agreed that this is a need. And as a business person, I know firsthand when you present value to people, they will pay for value. They will come up with a way to do that. Cost isn't an issue. Is it worth it for me to pay for this? And that's the value proposition that CPP has to bring to the table, and CPS when we go back to the voters, if we decide to go back to the voters in 2025 or whenever that is. So thank you.
Thank you very much. So I think we do have word from Ms. Jones that she had an issue come up this morning, but is on the road. And so we'll welcome her when she gets here. My proposal would be we keep on moving and take a look at the shared vision portion, which is that first item on the agenda. And I was going to propose here, I think our board, I know, has an email from either Pat or Dan or both that has a whole series of attachments on it, which I thought was a really nice historical review of just about every official document as it relates to Cincinnati Preschool Promise from CPS. And in that batch are things like the levy language, the original shared vision, the renewed shared vision in 2020, the original master agreement. There's just a ton of context in there. And within that, what I was hoping we could look at together was that shared vision. And I just want to check, is there anybody on the Preschool Promise side where it would be helpful to have a copy of that? If you were at our, I know Marcia and Micah, we were looking at that in some of the early meetings, but does anybody need a copy of those documents?
It would be good we were all looking at the same things. So, I mean, we might all have all that stuff, but if you have a packet that you are working from?
Yeah, I think let's do a couple things. So let's do a couple things. I don't know that our office has everybody's email address for this group, but I know that Pat ran some hard copies. She's watching in our board office. So this is me asking Pat if you would bring in some of those hard copies. Yeah, that sounds great. So that's a great idea. Thank you, Dr. Moffett. Thank you, Micah. So hey, Dan, can I ask you a question? Just because I'm neurotic about these things, like the subject line of the email is client privileged, and I don't want to waive that. What's the best way of getting a copy of the relevant stuff to the relevant folks?
Documents themselves without the annotated memo that I put together.
That's great. So can you
I'm gonna
send
forward that to Jake, and then Jake can do.
That sounds great.
Does that work? Great.
Excellent. So we also have Pat with a couple of hard copies. Great. Great. Thanks everybody's patience. This is worth doing, and it's worth doing the right way. So bear with us, and we will get that in front of the right people. Dan, would you mind forwarding a copy of that to Rob as well? And then Rob will want to put probably some of those up on the screen. Okay, so my proposal would be that the place that we start would be, there's a document that is the shared vision from 2016. There is also a document called shared vision, and it's from 2020. The reason there are two of those is that our board reaffirmed that shared vision as we were going for a renewal of the original tax levy. So there are, I think, minimal, if any, differences between those documents, as it was a reaffirmation of the values that we had at the time of the first levy.
Ben, if I can just add there quick, Mr. Lindy, sorry, President.
Yeah, it's just fine.
If I can just add the one change that we really requested as part of that, which CPS granted, was adding some language about preschool promise. The language in there is functional autonomy, and adding more functional autonomy for preschool promise. And that was done out of a discussion of the fact that we weren't a little startup anymore that didn't exist. We were an organization that was moving and had a staff and had a stronger board from when we originally did this. I'll tell you, I don't think we really operationalized that in any way. Because we didn't make any changes to the master agreement, but I do think that context is important for today. It was an affirmation of both boards to add in some language that preschool promise should have more functional autonomy over its funds, and I think that helps color part of what we're trying to seek to operationalize now with the master agreement and more flexibility for preschool promise and CPS.
Thank you. And so I think last thing here before we open it up. This process of trying to get to a new master agreement has had a couple of different chapters. And there was a chapter earlier this fall where both boards had tasked a small working group, inclusive of the key administrators in both organizations and a small number of board members, to try to move this process along towards something that could be recommended to both boards. During that chapter, I want to just share some gratitude for Marcia and for Brandon, who got together to try to look at exactly this question of what kinds of changes, if any, might there be to the shared vision. And so I thought we could just invite both Marcia and Brandon to share kind of what they discussed, any ideas that they had. And then I think we should ask the question, what else should we be talking about here that hasn't come up yet? And so would either Marcia or Brandon, would you be willing to share a little bit about that?
So one question I have, we did present a copy of the shared vision and plan that Brandon and I worked on together at our last meeting. And my question is that in your packet? Because that might be a place to start versus going back to, because that's kind of where we benchmark things. It includes the things that Micah just mentioned, as well as what we discussed in the meeting. And so, in my opinion, it would be a good place to start, because that way, board, everybody else can ask questions who were not part of that conversation, can ask questions about what we were thinking at that time versus us trying to make it work with the document that's 4 years old.
Yeah, so what I'll do here, I don't think everybody has that, but I just sent a copy of it to Dan. And Dan, when you get it, if you wouldn't mind sending it to Jake and then to our folks. And yeah, and Rob as well, thanks. That is in cyberspace. Yeah, Dr. Moffat.
So just so that I'm clear, because I'm very unclear at the moment. I was unaware that there was the small subgroup of the subgroup that Marcia and Brandon were working on a shared vision. Are there any other documents or things that have been worked on collectively so that we can get that all now and we can address that? Okay, so this is the only one?
It's just the two. It was the, as an action item out of one of our meetings, Luring, one of our meeting in October, I believe it was, the two of us agreed that we would take offline and look at the shared vision and just offer some updates to that.
Okay.
So it's more updated than what we had in 2020 because
Sure.
that was prior to, the levy of 2020. So
Sure.
it would give clarity as to where we are right now and where we
Okay.
should start talking.
And just to make sure, fully transparent, as far as like subgroups that broke out from our small group meetings, the only documents I think have been produced are this and the master agreement that we sent to you all, that you all blue line last night. There was one other one, and I do think there will be a time and place where we'll need to discuss this today. I don't know if a document was created from it, but we did ask both groups' treasurers to spend some time looking at how the funds have been split previously and modeling. That's the one other, I think, subgroup of that conversation that's transpired.
Okay, because in full transparency, I, as a board member, have not seen this. So this is the very first time that I'm hearing that documents were created from the subgroup and or looking at them. So I'm just being transparent.
So either Marcia or Brandon, appreciated your work. This was some months ago, but do you want to talk about what led you to suggest some of the pieces that are in here?
So I will say this, there's not an actually substantial difference between what was in, it's literally a couple words difference between what was in the 2020 and what was in the draft of what Ms. Utel and I put together. The hope was that putting this together is just a framing of the discussion, not so much as something we would then hold fast to. And even in our discussions, we brought back the point that all of this would come back to our board, go back to their board for the larger discussion as to whether or not this mirrors or it matches up to what we were looking at. So I think, in a large part, I would say probably like 95% of what's in the draft that Ms. Utel and I put together is the exact same wording from the 2020 shared vision, which we both acknowledge that there are certain aspects of, again, that our board has to make a determination on whether or not that's something we still continue to think about. you know, again, I don't know that there's much more else that I would say as to with regards to the changes. I think a large part of them is just correcting wording that match more to where our current time is versus what we had previously lived under. But I don't think there's any substantial changes to the principles or the ideas or concepts within it. So I don't know if Marcia, if you want to add anything else beyond that.
Yeah, other than what Micah pointed out about, you know, the fact that as an organization we've matured, that's reflected in that as well when it talks about our ability to function autonomously, but also recognizing that we need accountability and transparency. That's also included in there as well. That's, you know, it pretty much covers it.
Thank you, Brandon. Thank you, Marcia. I think, you know, a number of folks on our end felt strongly that we start here with, you know, what should be in a shared vision and should be reaffirmed. From my perspective, I have no strong opinion on I love the pieces that were in there. I love the ideas that Brandon and Marcia floated. I'd love to see if there are questions or concerns that people have. Would love to get them out on the floor. Yeah, Mrs. Weinberg.
It's not necessarily a question, but the concern is, can I have the document sent to me? I'd like to have it in front of me so I can at least see it.
I think it is, isn't it?
No, it's not.
Oh, I thought it was. Dan, did you get it for me okay?
Yes, and I was going to ask that too. Can't hear.
Even me?
I thought it was. So everyone on that end, we cannot hear you. If you could really speak up into the mic. I can hear you, Ben, when you're speaking, but everyone over there, it's really hard.
Okay. So as our folks are getting that, anything else? I mean,
I'll just add one other item, and that is, I thought Brandon and Marcia did a really nice job of trying to make this agreement state that we'll operationalize it through finalizing the master agreement. And when it talks about setting forth how the funding is going to work and those types of things, that it's complying with the terms of the master agreement. I mean, one thing that I think should be made clear, and I've heard missaid a few times, not today, but previously, is that the voters never approved any type of master agreement. The voters approved a levy for preschool expansion, which doesn't have very much specifics in it, a few, and those are all maintained in this shared vision. The master agreement was discussed, drafted after the voters approved the levy. It was a team of staff, legal counsel, a couple board members, and then finally approved by the CPS board and then the Preschool Promise board in its first meeting ever. Just to kind of, I think that keeping the spirit of what has happened so far, certainly keeping fidelity with what the voters approved, and also what was trying to operationalize the flexibility that we talked about, a desire for. I think this draft with Brandon and Marcia's revisions does a really nice job of that.
Ms. Bolton.
Yeah, thank you. And I think what Micah has said needs to be emphasized for sure, that we did not take to the voters a master agreement. We took our word and an idea and a shared, interesting, creative, needed concept. And based upon that, as well as a national movement and a statewide movement to commit by the business community to preschool, because they knew that it was so important to invest in those little people, particularly. So I think it's right. Nobody ever said to the voters, we want you to approve a master agreement. We want you to approve this concept. Here's the shared kind of vision that we're expressing to the folks. And then we need you, in an act of faith and democracy, leave to us the writing of the master agreement that will figure out how we organize this. And I think we're all very proud of both shared agreements, visions, and certainly the master agreement, and want to look at the master agreement ultimately as we need to make some adjustments because we have more knowledge. But I do think we do need to keep in mind that this was done as a big concept, and we delivered, and so did the business community, and so did the voting population, and so did our staffs and Preschool Promise staff. And there are issues in the shared vision. It'd be great if we could come up with a shared vision, obviously, that we all can agree to, and then worry about the master agreement. Thank you.
Yeah, couldn't agree more with everything you said. So everyone understands the shared vision is part of the master agreement. And I want to make sure we don't view these as separate tasks. It is a document that's one of the other. We want to get them both done. And we want to get them both done as quickly as we're able to. And frankly, other than the flexibility and the making sure we're being good fiscal stewards and not overspending funds, we don't have any grand departures that, no changes as far as operationally how we want to work, which is why we tried to have this version of the shared vision point to the master agreement that we're working on for that and to operationalize those in the master agreement. As I've said, and as I think a few of you have said today as well, we know we need to have some big discussions about the future very soon. And I'm talking about the future of more than 2 to 3 years from now. And we do kind of view that as the next phase of what we need to do in our operation. We've not yet had a chance as a board. We've been saying, hey, we got to get this done. And then when that's done, we want to start talking internally and with you about, to the extent we want to make some bigger changes to go to the voters for a renewal and expansion, whatever it may be, that we have those discussions once we finalize this task.
Thank you, Micah. Thank you, Eve. As people look through, and this could be, I'm realizing this is a lot of our boards, and we have our incredibly talented executive director, superintendent, general counsel, treasurers, others here. Is there anything on the master agreement, other questions people want to ask, or areas that they feel, excuse me, thank you, shared vision, that people feel we should be talking about together in this meeting? Yeah, Brennan.
I was just going to add one quick thought. The first, for those who have it now, and I know it's on the screen, for a portion of the screens, it's weird. The first of the first 3 bullets, the one that we substantially, the whereas, the third whereas that's on there, was one that we changed in accordance with the fact that the master agreement was being reworked at the time. And that we did remove one whereas, and that we were not seeking a renewal of a levy, which was actually in the 2020. So to give some specifics of stuff that we did change, so we acknowledge that the levy was passed, was voted on, agreed to, and in the first 3 bullets, and that we have a master agreement that expired and that we were working from to create a new master agreement. So in those first 3, again, just reiterating where we currently sit. And I don't know that the next 4 whereas clauses, we actually changed it all from where the original one. So I mean, I think it may be a point of discussion for us. The majority of the language throughout the rest of it did not change the one bullet point, and it's redlined in the document itself. We did change from the bullet point, or from the numbered sections, was that we did add to, children who benefit from quality preschool. There was a kind of change in the wording there, again, recognizing that to a certain extent, what we had been talking about through the original levy as well as to renewal was expanding access to more. And what we are talking about now in some ways is expanding quality that's received, right? And so I think that was something that is worth us revisiting and worth us discussing as collective. But I think at least from the first few clauses, the first few whereases, I think it may be helpful just to kind of go through and see whether or not any of that language that's updated to reflect where we currently sit is, if that's something that everyone agrees is where we currently are. And if that's the case, then I don't think I think that's one way to go through it and look at the document and say, these are where we currently sit, and this is what would be helpful for building that shared vision as we go forward.
Thank you, Brandon. Sally.
Yeah, so I don't know, I don't want to wordsmith here for sure, but when we talk about vision, and this goes to in some ways what Dr. Moffitt was talking about, I think we need a statement of some sort that says what we're about. And by that I mean something roughly like Cincinnati Public Schools. This is a Cincinnati Public Schools community partnership to ensure that through high quality preschool, as many children as possible come to school ready to succeed. I mean, we talk about vision, but there's no vision in this. It continues to be operations. And so I just was picking off that word vision and thought we ought to say somewhere in here what it is we've agreed to come together to make good things happen for kids through the use of high quality preschool.
I think that's a beautifully written paragraph, and I hear you on not wordsmithing. We can save that for the English majors. We're missing Mr. Morosky. He's usually our go-to on that.
Yeah.
But I think
We're like, why are we together? We're together to help kids be prepared to succeed through the use of high quality preschool. And that's so fundamental to where we go from there and how we negotiate or discuss anything else.
Yeah. Thank you. Any, I see some people nodding their heads. Any comments or reactions to Dr. Moffitt?
I love that. I think you're not a wordsmith, but you filled that in very great, very well. Thank you for that. And also to tie in, that will help people that are in the public that look at this, anchor them on what it is that we're doing, that we remember what the charge is. Because when we go to voters, I had a conversation this morning, they're wanting what they voted for. And we need them to be reassured that we're keeping kids first and the education of kids first. And so I think it's a wonderful way to anchor what they're about to read in this process-driven document to center them on children. So I like it. I think we should have it as one of the first whereases, if possible, so that we can center the discussion for ourselves and for the public.
Thank you. I don't know if either from Shara or from Ironetta, like, is there anything as it relates to the shared vision that feels really important to you that is not addressed in the current version we've been discussing?
I don't think for us that there is. I'm getting an echo, Rob. I do think that it would be helpful though for the board if we added red line, blue line, whichever it is, so that we could actually see where the updates were. That might be.
Yeah, I think, Rob, the version up looks like it's a Google document. You don't have to download the version so that it's, and then you should see the red. There really is it's like one word, right, I think, that got added. But it would be good to be able to see that.
Right. And definitely supportive of a visionary language around why we're doing this work together.
Yeah, Rob, if you go down to the bullet number 4, there it is. It's showing up now. Great, thank you. And Shara, anything on your end that feels important that's not addressed in the current vision?
No, not at all. I would share that. I think it is important, as everyone has said, that vision is what the public is looking to. And as we start to think, not only do we need support for looking to the future, but we need support of people who are actually bringing their children to preschool, right? Not just the voters that support this. And I think having a shared vision and alignment, as we clearly do with Preschool Promise and CPS, of the commitment to our youngest learners would be the best way to start the document.
Great, thank you. Yes, Ms. Wagner.
So the biggest difference in the two versions that I can see is in bullet point number 3. In the original version of the vision, it ties the funding allocation to the quality rating of the center and the income level of the family. And in the new vision, that language is removed.
And from your perspective, Ms. Wagner, that is a good thing, that is a bad thing, it is a neutral thing?
From my perspective, the board that approved this vision, that was an important factor, that this levy was intended to increase the quality of each center. We're increasing the quality that's provided to all of our students, city residents, for 3 and 4-year-olds, and that the income levels of the children who couldn't afford quality preschool were given that help. So that's why it was defined in the vision the way it was.
Mm-hmm. Anybody, Mike, on your side who wants to speak to that?
Yeah, the first thing I said when our small group sat down, and the first thing I said today when our larger group sat down, was the one big change we really wanted to bring to this. We've been fully transparent about it, has been wanting to provide more flexibility to both CPS and Preschool Promise as far as how each party deploys the funds to maximize the success. Dr. Moffitt, you, I think, said it really nicely last night that the system that the previous master agreement and previous version of this that Jen references of the shared vision created was one that was equal but not equitable. That line, number 3, was, we have multiple different systems in this larger system of preschool expansion. You have CPS, and you know yours very well. We have lots of different types of providers that we serve, and within that, our own system of trying to run Preschool Promise as a unified front. But the treasurer is absolutely correct. That's a change. It's the change we said we want. It's flexibility. We think that'll be helpful. We think it's operationalizing the last change these boards agreed to, which was to give Preschool Promise greater functional autonomy over the use of its funds. That's why we have the language written this way as in accordance with the master agreement, so that we can make sure that everyone is comfortable with how we're agreeing those funds will be spent, while each side will still separately have greater autonomy of how to spend them.
Thanks, Megan. I think there's, I think this came up earlier in the context of the master agreement, the shared vision being part of the master agreement. I think in the versions that we were discussing last night, at least as I understand it, there are plenty of provisions within that draft that would make sure that the ways that monies are being spent are in line with the values that drove the initiative in the first place, and that are driving its continued support. Ms. Bolden?
Yeah, I'm actually happy with the concept of additional, functional autonomy. And I think that was the original concept anyway, as long as everybody understood who or what organization or what group is going to be held accountable. And that would be the school board and the school district. So that ability for that transparency and the ability to act on such transparency does belong to the school board, because we are the taxing agent. I think as much flexibility as possible and autonomy as possible. To Sally's point, I just as soon have one paragraph vision statement and save the rest of this thing for the master agreement. It's sort of like when we're in policy, we want to be able to do the concept, and then well, I try not to always do this, as the superintendent will attest, give the rest of it to the administration to try to figure out. But I mean, to me, that's some place to go. But I want to emphasize what Jen said, and all of us that have been involved with this forever. This is not to make as much preschool as possible only for everyone. The concept here was to have as many quality seats, no deserts, but also to give first dibs, first and last dollar to the families and the children that couldn't best afford it. And we cannot lose that concept. That's the equity piece that I care about, because I I can remember, and some of you will recall too, discussions that took place throughout the district where we were going to have preschool units outside of the school district. Or we're going to have people that may not even actually need the help get money to go to preschool, where then we were not spending the money, or as I think Shara has mentioned, the communication skills of getting the kids that need it the most, perhaps, get it to them. So I think those would be my several points. I'd say a paragraph, and the rest of this into the master agreement, but I'm not losing sight of that initial concept of quality, certainly for everybody, but the finding and the functioning for additional monies to the families that need it the most.
Thank you, Ms. Bolton. I think it might be that we're relatively close to a breakthrough on the shared vision piece, and then maybe it's worth spending just a minute or two longer here to see if we are. And that would still give us a meaningful amount of time to talk through the different versions of the master agreement, the CPS version of which we discussed last night. But I tried my best to write down what Sally shared, informed by what Eve just said. And what I'd like to do is read that back to people to see if that resonates or to see if it is somehow off. And what I wrote down is that our vision is that this CPS community partnership will ensure through high quality preschool that as many children as possible come to school prepared to succeed. I'm sure that's wrong. I'm sure I missed something or butchered something. Eve, would you go ahead?
All that's great. I think there's one more sentence, though, that we are guaranteeing our first obligation is to the families and the children that can't afford it the most. That it's not just the greatest number of people in preschool, but it must be the children and the families that need it the most. I don't know how that works. Sally, write a sentence. Come on.
We got it. So the first part was our vision is that the CPS community partnership will ensure through high quality preschool that as many children as possible come to school prepared to succeed. Our first obligation is to the children who need it the most and can't otherwise afford it.
I love the idea of a one sentence vision and operationalizing things in the master agreement. I feel pretty confident our board would support that as we wrote it.
Yeah. And Brandon?
I was just going to add one thought, and it's really just as a tag along to Eve's point. I think a lot of what was done before with the shared vision was because we did not, the initial one was because we didn't have an entity, right? We didn't have a structure. We didn't have an idea. And so now that we have it, that actually moves us in that direction of saying, look, we've been we've been making this work. Too early in the morning for me to be making big words. We've been making this work. And so now that vision is about what do we continue doing going forward, as opposed to how do we create the vehicle in which we're going to all ride in. So I always hate the analogy of creating the plane as you're flying it, because I feel like that's a terrible idea in actuality. But I think this fits into that mold of we're moving that step forward, that we don't need to put down every little thing about how do you create every little aspect of it in the shared vision anymore, that now we are maturing to a shorter shared vision that just says, here's what our goals, here's what the point of it is, and then we'll operationalize it into the master agreement.
Dr. Muffin?
And this mic. So I'm a visual learner as well. I want to see it written. I think we're close. I just need to see it written, and then we can massage it. I do like the wording, but I also would like to see equity in there somewhere, because I think that drives, we have equity policy, we talk about equity, and I want to ensure that we remain diligent to equity and not equality throughout the rest of what we process. So I need to see it written so that I can look at it, and then I think we're close, but I just need to see it.
I think we should give this 3 more minutes, because I think we're very close and I think we can get there. And that would be a big win. And if it's clear in 3 minutes, it's just could eat up the whole rest of the hour. We'll just move on. But I sent Rob an email you've got from me, and I added the word equity in a way that I think does justice to what Dr. Moffett was saying, but we'll find out. Ms. Jones.
Yes, thank you. And I apologize to everybody for being late. Had a couple issues going on this morning. But I just want to be clear. It sounds like we're still discussing the shared vision. And what I think I understand is that we're possibly looking at a shortened version. Is that correct? A shortened version of what we had last year?
Yeah, shorter, and I think not so much because the other things don't matter, but that can be a part of a master agreement.
I understand. I'm just playing catch up.
Yep.
I'm sorry, and I don't want to take up too much time playing catch up because I was late. But so I do like the equity piece. I would just hope. I want to say maybe there's a need to expound. Maybe a sentence or two on what that means. So in the shared vision, when we're thinking about equity, and I don't know if the word equity is in the revised version, but maybe to spell that out, what that actually means, what's the intent of that equity piece, and I think might be helpful. And I do appreciate that we want to try to make it a little shorter.
And Ms. Jones,
okay.
the version that's on the screen.
Okay.
Was an effort to do that. But I think, and also like maybe what we do is give people a chance to think about this as we talk about the master agreement versions, because we're about halfway through our time for this morning. If people need more than just this meeting to think about this, I think that's okay. But if it is possible to get some closure on it, that's also a good thing. Yeah. Superintendent.
One of the questions that we have, just to make sure that we're all aligned, so if we're moving the information from the shared agreement, from the shared vision into the master agreement, that's where we would then have language that supports the quality of the program as well as the income level of the individuals that would be using the preschool promise dollars.
That is my understanding. Is that your understanding as well?
Yeah, I don't think we have a problem with that. I'm trying to work through a draft that we got just a few hours ago, but I think you all put language in about quality, and so I think that is addressed there. As far as income level, I'm not sure if that's in there or not. I think certainly we can agree to the children who need it most. That's always how we've operated, and if that's the type of statement you're envisioning, I don't think we have any problem with that.
Okay, so last call. This does not need to be a final version, but if anybody has any last reactions to what's on the screen, share that, and then we're going to transition to the second item on the agenda. Ms. Bolden?
Yeah, for the statement that this is the one statement that the public's going to read. They're not going to read anything else, which is okay. But I do, in that statement, I do want the obligation piece or the equitable distribution of the resources or whatever in there. I don't want it just to be the one sentence or two about the vision, but the part of that vision is helping those kids first. So if we can make sure that this somehow, I think it's good. I mean, I'm sure there's a wording that we could make it be better or whatever, but I think that's the concept.
Can I just add one other, in the very beginning in the CPS community partnership, if we could have it as CPS CPP partnership. Yep. And
great. I was sure it was a typo.
It is a community partnership.
Okay, so I think we're about, it's 10:05 and we're going to end right at 11. I think that our board was in this room last evening talking about the version the administration prepared of the master agreement that incorporates the last discussion we had as a board. And I know that our colleagues, our counterparts at Preschool Promise have not had an enormous amount of time with that document. But thank you for any time you were able to give it prior to this morning. And I thought I would start by asking, did you have any time to look at it? And to the extent that you did you have any reactions to it?
Yes, we did. individually, not discussing collectively. So let me be clear on that. But and I'm not sure that our full board has seen it yet. I will tell you, I thought it was a great next step. I think there's probably, which I think we all anticipated, some questions we have on a couple of the proposed revisions and some refining that needs to get done, but there was nothing in there that looked like a dramatic departure from what we were hoping or expecting or proposed. And I think a couple items that need to get cleaned up in a process that contracts do as they're going back and forth a few times, but nothing that was dramatic. The one thing that is blank in the contract and that I heard you all say kind of needed to be discussed further last night that I was hoping we could do today was this concept of how the funds for the duration of the levy are split up. I think we've generally kind of already agreed for this year. We've done that through the budget process that this year's done, but we've got a few more years left. One thing that is a deep flaw of the current version of the master agreement is there's no real like cap or ceiling on how many dollars will be spent each year. And we're kind of now down to this, hey, there's just a few years left in making sure that we do that correctly. So what we proposed to you originally was we agreed to a split. We actually left it blank in the first draft that we sent. We didn't propose an actual split. I will share, and I don't know if this has been shared with the full board or not. In the small group, what we next said when it came time to filling in the blanks, and which we still think is a great idea, would be that we should look at the percentage of how the money has been split up historically. And of the money, I'm talking about the $15 million a year for preschool promise and for preschool expansion within CPS of these levy funds, and just try to agree to that split for the funds that remain. We haven't made this about trying to seek any additional dollars or any higher level of the split, and our hope is that you all will do the same. I didn't know this at the time we proposed it, which was probably a terrible negotiation tactic, but I've now since learned that this way the funds have been split has been pretty close to 50-50. I think it's been closer to like 54 to preschool promise and 46 to CPS. And if that's wrong, please correct me. Jen's given me a thumbs up. And that is what we are proposing and what we did with this kind of our proposal. You all have, and by the way, let me step back for a minute and discuss, I think this is important context for all. In that split is several things. With that money, CPS does certain things, Preschool Promise does certain things. Preschool Promise funds tuition assistance for students in quality schools. We also fund quality improvement to help schools that aren't at a 3 to 5 star rating try to get there. We also have staff and administration. Those are kind of generally the 3 buckets of money that we use these funds for. Speaking about my understanding of how you all use these funds, there's money set aside for special education, for traveling special education teams to help service an increased need from expansion. There is tuition assistance, which is, I think, the bulk of what you all do. It's also my understanding that you all historically have used some of these funds for things to expand, like kind of how we would do quality improvement. Like it's my understanding the Mozart building was purchased with some of these funds. So just to kind of set the table of how these funds have been used previously, we do slightly different things, and that's great. We're not proposing a change of how we do these things. But we do think there needs to be a defined split on how the money is shared, and we thought the fairest way to do it would be how the formula has previously led to us splitting it without us agreeing to a split. I've heard a discussion, and I saw in your draft a comment about wanting it to be per pupil. I would submit that the current split does account for historical per pupils. I understand there could be changes over the next few years, but it does bake that in already. It also bakes in the spending you all have done on special education and on expansion, like purchasing the Mozart school. And for us, it bakes in the quality improvement that we've done and the administration dollars that we need to run our business successfully. So That's the split that we've had out there. It was frankly the one piece from the discussion last night that it sounded like you all wanted to hear more clarity on and have more discussion on. And we thought this might be a good venue to do that. And I'll maybe now say what I hope is the conclusion of what we can next 50 minutes is if we can get to some clarity on that. I think based on the comments we have from you from last night, the document you provided last night, and some clarity on a funding split that the boards are generally prepared to agree to, we think we can be just a couple weeks away from getting this finished. We are of the belief that we can kind of review your comments and get some thoughtful, revisions, accept everything we can, any changes we want to propose, do that within just a couple of days, certainly before the week is out, with the hope that we can then, if both groups can kind of decide who it is that's going to be the folks that they want to help get this over the finish line. Our board doesn't feel that 15 board members and 5 staff members should negotiate the last 3% of the agreement. You all are certainly entitled to tell us who you all want it to be, but that's our hope for the finish of this, is that we can have this discussion about funding, because it sounded like that was what you wanted to discuss more of last night, and then finalize with hey, we're really close. We want to empower a few folks from each group to get this over the finish line, which is historically always how we have done this, and then have both boards approve it as quickly as we're able to.
Thank you, Micah. I think one thing that would be helpful, and I think it's exciting to hear from your perspective that the 2 drafts do appear that close. I was not sure about that based on last night's meeting. And I just want to let that sit in the room for a second. That based on our discussion last night, and their preliminary, or at least Micah's, I want to just check that other folks don't have a radically different perspective. But that we could be in a place where within a couple of weeks, there's a vote on a final version. And I think that's, from at least this board member's perspective, happy news. I think one thing that would be helpful, because our treasurer just shared some documents with us, is would you mind, treasurer, spending just a second kind of, or in connection with Hector, like kind of sharing with us what this is, and also to the extent that, our administration has a perspective on which of these would be best for CPS.
Certainly. So the Word document that starts with the title Preschool Expansion Funding Allocations came from the meeting that Hector and I had at the request of that small committee, coming up with different options on how to split the funds. I then shared that with Superintendent Wright and Dan Hoying, and we elected to go, we thought per pupil would be the fairest way. So that takes you to the other document. This for a second. So just to walk you through my logic, I took the budgeted per number of students in each income category from Hector's document and the fiscal year 24 budget. And then I used our June, I think it was our May information in terms of our number of students per income. So CPP was expecting 733, and we're expecting 816 students. I then took the annual levy income of 15.5 million in collections that was forecasted for fiscal year 24. I subtracted out the special education that gets spent on all the preschool expansion students and the quality improvement that was in the fiscal year 24 CPP budget to leave $12.8 million remaining to be allocated out. And so then I actually calculated it 2 ways. If you just took the raw numbers, regardless of half-time, full-time students, just to make it easier, or I did it proportionally based on the income levels. So I'll just walk you through the first number. So at CPP, there were 697 who had received 100%, so they get 697 as a proportional FTE, meaning full-time equivalent. And 200 to 250, they had 38, which in the formula currently, they receive 75% of tuition reimbursement, so a full-time equivalent of 28.5. So that's how I ended up with the 1589 and the 1549 combined. So in either case, you take the 12.8 million divided by the raw count of students, 1,589, you receive a per pupil allocation of $8,062.56. Or if you use the proportional one, it drops or it increases to 8,270 per student. So I just applied that to the numbers above. So for CPP in the yellow box, 750 students times the per pupil would be 6,046,000, or their proportional 733 times the per pupil, which would be 6,062,000. Following me? I did the same thing for CPS, so I can show you that I allocated the 12.8 million out, and then I restated it and compared it to the current year budget. So for CPP, this year's budget is 11.1 million. The new method would give them a combined 7.2, so their quality improvement money plus their per pupil, and so that would be a net change of 3.9 million roughly. And then in CPS, our budget's 9.7 compared to the new method, so we would drop 1.4 in the raw count versus proportional.
Can I ask you one question? I just want to make
Absolutely.
sure I'm following. This is my
Yep.
first time seeing this. The kind of second chart there, not the first table, but where you have the annual levy income of 15.56.
Mhm.
The special education money, is what's deducted from that what's in the current version of the master agreement? I think there's a fixed dollar amount. Is that right?
I'm not aware of that. It's what's in the current budget to support the growth of preschool expansion.
Okay. And
So
then
the itinerant team and the diagnostic team.
And then I see this accounts for what sounds like is our quality improvement budget number. Does this account for we have a third category, kind of like administration, overhead of staff. Does this account for that before we split out those
No,
funds?
because we do too, but so I didn't do that. We talked about the most equitable way was to allocate the quality improvement monies to CPP, the special education, because we do have quality improvement spending, but it's not part of the preschool budget right now for the levy, so I didn't account for that.
Got
Nor did I
it. Yeah,
account for
this
it.
conversation about equality and equity, this is an item where we're different. You all have a bigger infrastructure, those types of things. I just want to point out this formula, which we've not proposed, and this is the first time I'm seeing it, creates a funding split in which CPS retains a greater percentage of the money that historically has been the case, which is not something that we propose. We've proposed the same split. And frankly, I think not including our administration as part. I understand you have administration too, and that I think has been baked into the previous split as well. I think there's an administrative fee you all take every year out of the funds.
200,000, but
Yeah.
I should have footnoted the fact that we put $10 million of other funds into this effort. Because lost all are in.
Got it.
Okay.
But I just want to be clear, our proposal, this is our first seeing this, and obviously is pretty different than what the historical split has been. The proposal that we've come to the table with is let's keep the historic split that it's been, which I think is, do we agree it's about 53-54% that has been the historic split?
54-46 is the average since year one. Right, Hector?
Yeah, Dr. Moffat.
I'm always going to have a question. So this is the first time that I'm saying this too. I have a question. Jen, what currently, I understand you all put a lot of work into this proposal. What are they getting? Are we doing per pupil now? Are we doing, I would like to understand what is CPP currently getting allocated to them?
So this year's budget's $11 million. Last year, it was 9.89. And they underspent it by $2 million. So Hector can quote the actual budget.
So I know I'm a math teacher, but can somebody just give me like what the per pupil spend is for that? That was at the 733 students?
Probably say last year with that calculated for math purposes.
We got a mic for you, Hector.
Thank you. Can we check?
I think it's on. I think it's on.
There we go. So this chart chose fiscal year 24,
Okay.
the one that the treasurer has distributed. We're talking now about fiscal year 23, which is finished, and actuals. If I look at the spending that CPP had in fiscal year 23 and the rough number of students that we had back then, it would come out at roughly about $14,300 if I took the full spending of CPP and just divided it by students. Now, remember, we have multiple programs, but just total students, total spending, be 14.3 million.
And
Sorry,
Dr.
14.3 thousand.
Dr. Moffitt, if I can add to it, just to, I think, provide additional context to your question. Right now, the way funding is split up is in part based on per pupil. There's tuition assistance that's the same number for CPS and CPP. But if you looked at our overall, all the money we get and all the students we serve, some of which is reflected in tuition assistance, some is reflected in quality improvement, and some we need a staff to be able to serve these students. You wouldn't get an identical per pupil number like this is proposing. Our costs would probably be higher per student than yours would be. That's always how we've operated. We talked about this equality and equity, and I'd submit that's why. But there is an element to it that is important. But this proposal that we're seeing would be a departure from how it's been done previously. And we're asking that we continue to keep the previous split.
Okay, so just so that I can kind of understand, again, I apologize if this is like I'm two. So you all have a cost per pupil, but you also have a quality piece to your, like what goes into your consideration? Because it seems like this is just one piece of that.
Correct. Tuition assistance is one piece of what we do. It's also one piece of what you do. Historically, we have pegged those to the exact same number. The tuition assistance dollar has been the same per student. This draft moves away from that to kind of give both sides the best flexibility to deploy funds as this best see fit. But if you looked at, this is saying we have an administration that is an expense. You all do as well. I think we use a greater percentage of funds on our administrative expenses than you all do. We do quality improvement. You all do special education. We both do tuition assistance. Collectively, those have all come together to get to this split that we've had of 53-46 of the collective pot, which is what we've continued to say, hey, that's what we'd like to move forward on. This would be, I think, our perspective would be making it more challenge for us to serve students because it doesn't account for the fact that we have administration, we have an overhead. It would, again, kind of be treating equally, not equitably. And one thing that I just want to reiterate, we have made from the beginning, we don't want this to be a fight about money. We didn't come here saying we want to try to get more money than we've been getting previously. We've got no complaints there. It has been we want to try to codify moving forward and also set caps so that we can collectively make sure we're being good stewards of the funds the rest of the way.
I have one more question. If, based on this formula, would you be able to service the same number of students in the same manner?
If we fired, we'd have to fire all our staff. So no.
Based on this formula?
Correct.
Okay. I want to repeat. Wait a minute. I want you to. What did you just say? You'd have to fire everybody because it's not enough money.
Provides no funding for administrative overhead.
Thank you.
Yeah, Jen.
So just a couple comments. So correct, we both used the same cost of quality up until this year. This year's budget for CPP used a 10% increase. We used a 3% increase because that was the language in the master agreement. So that this year was a little bit different. And if you look on the one Word document, the combined budgets are $20.8 million. Our annual revenues are roughly $15 million. Both organizations are going to have to cut back to live within our means.
And Jen, correct me if I'm wrong. The first statement you made, you said you approved us at 10, you at 3. We haven't been able to do that because the approval for 10 was we're going to give you this much money, but saying you can't use it that way. So I just want to be clear, we have done what you've asked. We haven't used that. And on the second piece, we totally agree, and that's what we think is an incredibly important function of this version of the master agreement, is kind of saying, here's how many dollars are left each year, and splitting it up in a proportional manner that makes sense to make sure, because we are in agreement. No one thinks we're going to find new money in the next few years that we haven't found, and we want to make sure we set appropriate caps each year, which we think this version of the agreement does.
Other comments, questions, Mr. Craig?
So I think I have two kind of thoughts and comments, and I think one builds off of where Jen left us at, which is that since I have been on the board, which is only 2 years, we've never spent less than 17 million, or never budgeted less than 17 million for preschool through the preschool levy. So like in some aspects of this, everybody is going to have to figure out how to live with less. And I think the reality is if we set the amount at 15, truth of the matter being, or 15, was it 15,560? Truth of the matter is that there's no way near either one of our programs we're going to come close to what we are currently spending in our preschool budget based on the levy alone, right? That's been a conversation point for the Budget and Finance Committee since I've been on the Budget and Finance Committee. And I'm sure it was annoying Ms. Bolton. I'm sure it was a conversation before I was on the Budget and Finance Committee. So I think that's one aspect, which I think is why in our small talk conversations, I had this point, which is that in some aspect, some way, we have to be honest that we don't have the funds and resources to do long-term exactly as much as we've been doing currently, because the reality is that we have been using funds that we underspent on in years past. And so while that may be a conversation point for us as we look for a new levy as to whether or not this current point of where we are is the sustainable amount, I think that's a fair conversation to have when we go back to that point. I think what we were asked, or I guess what Hector and the treasurer were asked to do is to put together based on what the allotment is of the 15,560. So there is some aspects of that we can have the discussion as to whether or not that's the right mark, or whether or not that's the mark that we can offer out as a going point, because I think the reality is it's going to be a drop for both of our programs of at least 2 million probably in what we were budgeting in our current stance. I do think one of the things I thought about this when we were having discussions, I think about it, something I've talked about with a few folks, is the idea of, and what I liked about what they did is they put together some buckets of things that were the things that were outside of what we would do. So like the quality improvement was a bucket of funds, right? The dollars for special education assistance, right? That was a bucket of funds. And I think if we're going to have that discussion, I think that's fair to have with regards to what are these buckets of funds. I think the reality is that it's still going to come out to being a lower number for anything beyond those kind of two categories, because it just is not there. Like there's a reality to the fact that if we're going to operate off of the 15,560, that's $5 million less than what we budgeted this year. And
yeah, we agree completely.
That's a huge drop in what we were talking about, which is, again, that's a quarter of the budgeted amounts drop, which is a reasonable thing for us to look at. But I think it does come back to the question of if we're going to allocate those funds, and I don't think it has to be like perfectly equal in every little aspect, but there's a reality that we have to have a funding approach that recognizes, while yes, the two programs do operate differently, there is still a fiscal limitation as to what can be done and should be done based on that. And so even that change of, even if we went from, this fits it at 50-50, even if we did 56, or was it 54-60 or 54-46, that's not a huge difference in the total amount. And so, I mean, I don't know that I understand kind of the idea and the concept there, but I also don't know that gets a huge difference in what is allocated out.
Yeah, so we totally agree on needing to make sure we're all going to have to live within our means, and I think discussing this in percentages ensures that, because it's actually, well, I shouldn't say it's easy, but I'm pretty confident Jen and Hector can figure out how much more levy money's coming and how much is left, and we can get to a number per year of what the total bucket is for the remainder of the levy without, if you haven't already done it, I'm sure you have. So it's really figuring out, giving both CPS and CPP certainty of how much of it each will have to deploy for the remainder of the levy, which is why we've thought percentages would be the best way to do it, and why we thought in line with the historical split was the fairest way to do it. It looks like there's 4 different options that were proposed in this draft. I just want to be clear, the one that we've come to the table with is option 1, which is the way we've done it historically. We think it's worked, we think it's fair, and we didn't ever want this to be about a money grab for CPP or anything like that. We want the public to know we're doing our best with the money we've been getting and want to continue on in that way.
Yeah, we'll go Sally and then Jen.
Just a quick question about the special ed deduction. In the original master agreement, the dollar amount was $200,000. This is a 800% increase. Has that happened over years, or is this proposed?
The 200,000 was the administrative cost that both United Way at the time and CPS would do for the administration of the expansion of preschool. That the 200,000 had nothing to do with special ed.
There was never an amount for special ed?
We've always budgeted, but it wasn't defined in the master agreement.
Can we check that? It's been a while since I've looked at it. Is there a way, Dan or Jake? I recall there being a $500,000 number. May be wrong. It's been a long.
I think it was mutually agreed. There was a mutually agreed amount.
I don't remember the maybe $500,000.
Hey, Jay, can you just say that into the mic one time? Thank you.
Yeah, I'll check it. I think the original didn't have a number. That was something that was floated around kind of in original discussions, but
I think the language is on no less than an annual basis, the parties shall mutually agree on an amount of preschool levy funds that the school district shall retain in order to create additional traveling special education teams to serve, consistent with state and federal guidelines, the anticipated increased number of special education students enrolled in community provider preschools. That's what I've got.
Thanks, that's helpful. And unless I've missed something, I don't know that we've done any type of mutual agreement on this, at least in the last few years.
Other, I said Sally and then Jen, but Jen, you had a different piece you wanted to raise.
So I just want to make a comment about the proportional split on income. In the early years, CPP received a lion's share of the allocated funding to help them with their startup. So I don't think the historical proportion is the fairest way to support CPS students. That's why we came up with a per pupil version.
Jen, I just want to make sure I followed all of that. Can you say it one more time?
So early in the cycle, CPP was starting up, and they were allocated more than CPS. We could have allocated more to our budget, and it was important for us to use the last dollar in first. So we did. I'm sorry, that didn't sound right. The other fund, non-levy funds, as the first funded, and then the levy would be used as last dollar in. So early years, the proportion of spending was higher than CPS could have spent. So just doing a historical perspective is not fair to the CPS students.
Yeah, thanks, Jen. And just to want to make sure I think what's happening, this is both trying to just make sure I'm not missing something and also maybe just clarifying where we are at the moment. I think there is broad agreement across both sides of our table up here that the total amount that needs to be divided each year is this 1556. And that itself is going to represent a pretty significant change for both CPS and for CPP, because historically we've been spending more than that. So I think that's one point of agreement. I think a second point of agreement is that a move towards increased flexibility with those funds for CPP is something that I think both sides are supportive of. The functional autonomy language came up a bunch in our vision discussion, but I think that's something that is different in this current proposal than in the past. I think where there is some disagreement is okay, given that there's going to be more flexibility and autonomy, given that the total amount to divide is going to be capped at this 15.56, which is the revenue from that part of the levy, what % of that goes to which organization?
Can I add, Ben, the only thing I'm not sure I'm prepared to say there's disagreement on that, because I don't think we've heard from your board on this discussion so far has been us and Jen, but it'd be helpful to hear from your board. We're here in the public saying the historical split is something we support and are here for, and it'd be helpful to hear feedback on that.
And I think that's a totally fair point. I also just want to, on those first two issues, I do think there's some broad agreement there. But to Micah's question, if other folks want to weigh in. It was Micah's question.
We've come to totally agree. Those first two items, it sounds like we've got pretty solid footing of everyone in the room today. My question was feedback from you all on the proposal that we've brought of the historic split of funds, the same percentage as 53.3%. And we have come to the table and said we'd like to codify that for the future. We'd like to hear kind of board comments, thought, response to that.
Well, I'll go since I'm the talkative one. I'm really caught in a conundrum because I was a voter and voted for this, but didn't vote for all of the memorandum of understanding. So at the end of the day, I want the most opportunity for preschool for as many kids as possible. I don't know if I necessarily agree with all of the intricacies, but as long as you all can service preschool, and if you think that that's the best method to do that with the percentage, I'm willing to support that. I'm also very, very concerned. I'm going to be very honest and very frank, because if we don't get this right to the voters and the citizens moving forward, we're discussing 15 million that we may not get moving forward. So I want to make sure that we agree on the flexible piece, but then also that we work this out so that we can have an opportunity to continue to provide preschool. Because if we don't, I had a conversation with someone this morning and encouraged them to watch, and they are paying attention to how we're handling this because the voters, the citizens did not approve the intricacies. They wanted access. And so I want to make sure that I'm maintaining some sort of integrity to that. And so if you feel like this is the best split, and you can continue to maintain what you do, I also think that we should really move forward on working together collaboratively for any future levies that we have. Maybe we ask for more money because we are not able to do this, but we need to have, it doesn't need to be a more money ask based off of this. It needs to be a more money ask based off of something that we can come together and then fully be able to fund both programs equitably. So that's my take.
We appreciate that.
Anyone else to Micah's question? Eve.
I want to go back to what Micah said, that and I was cheating. I was gadding a little bit when some of this was said. I'm sorry. I just want to go back to something since the public is watching. Did you say that if we use the proposal that Jen and Hector have worked on, and one of these options, there's a few options, that one of these options you would have to fire all of your staff?
Yes. So let me back up. There's one thing that I think Jen and Hector collectively worked on, or is this document? I don't want to speak for it. This document is what you both did together. Is that right? Or did just option one, Hector?
The top table are the different options that we came up together, and then I tried to provide examples.
Okay, so this document is not something that Jen and Hector worked on together. This is an internal to CPS document. This one they did. Number one is what we brought to the table, option one. 2 and 3 and 4 are other things that were thrown out as potential ways to do it. The one that we said, hey, we want to move forward on, and which we're still saying, hey, we want to move forward on, is option one. This document, which I don't believe Hector was a part of making, doesn't account for us having any type of administrative costs, which was the reflection of my comment. We'd have to fire all our staff.
So the option that you all propose is that first option, and that unless you get that first option, you would have to fire all your staff?
No.
Well,
If
help
we
me out
did,
here because you said it.
okay, well, let me be clear.
Yeah, please, for
This
the public's
option,
sake.
which I think is an attempt to calculate number 3 in a way that I think we would probably do different if we were part of. Under this version of calculating option 3 on this chart, it accounts for no administrative costs, so we wouldn't be able to have a staff. This is an attempt, this is an internal CPS document to do number 3 on this. It's not how I would account it, because I would include in the cost that we have to have for staff. And frankly, the cost that you all have been getting from staff, I think it's $200,000. That should be a part of it as well. So if I were to do option 3, I would do it differently. But under this attempt to do option 3, it leaves us $0 for staff. But option 3, I just want to reiterate again, what we've brought to the table is option 1. Jen and Hector looked at other ways of potentially doing it and came up with 2, 3, and 4. But what our group in the small meetings has proposed is option 1.
Just a point of clarification. I might have misunderstood, but when I was looking at any of these options, the proposals are using historical student counts to get an allocation for dollars in. But then the organization has the flexibility and autonomy to decide how they want to spend those dollars. So if we use the yellow table on the CPS document, this would be the total going to CPP would be the 6 and change million plus the 1.1 million for quality improvement. So that's a total of like 7.8-ish. And the CPP team would figure out itself how they wanted to spend. If they wanted to, fire everybody and give the executive director a $5 million raise, they could do that. But then there would be no kids served, and so I think it would absolutely net out to some either loss of services, loss of staff, or both.
Well, the per pupil number 8270, what's our current per pupil number that we fund students at?
For the new year is roughly $10,200.
So my reading of this, and again, I'm just trying to, Yashara, go ahead.
So I know we're trying to simplify it, but I think it's very clear to make a distinction between the per pupil cost overall and what we do for tuition assistance reimbursement maximum amount. Those are not the same thing, right? Because of the variations in the system. So it is fine for the purposes of the conversation to say that's what it is, but let's have some clarity about when we talk about our per pupil number, right? That is very different from how much we provide as maximum tuition assistance reimbursement.
Because of last dollar in and because of other factors.
So I think we've got at least another 15 minutes left, or 16 minutes left here. I'd like to spend at least the last 5 to 7 talking about a process going forward. I think one of the things that has been most challenging about this, I'm just speaking from my own perspective, is trying to get clear on who is negotiating what and by when. And I think while we have this group together, getting real clarity on what's going to happen next and who's going to do it and what people can expect and on what timeline is going to help us get to a final agreement as quickly as possible. But that still leaves us a little bit of time for any other questions or points people want to advocate on.
Can I return to the, Dr. Moffitt answered my question on our proposal of option 1, that 5346. I have been looking forward to an opportunity to get to hear all of you and hear your take on this so we can try to finalize it. If more folks are willing to share on that, I really want to get the best sense of where your board is so we can try to finalize this.
Yeah. Brennan.
So, and I think I said it a little bit earlier, but maybe we'll phrase it again to make it sound a little clearer, because it still feels early for me to be doing this, but not in board mode till 5 o'clock. But I think one of the things for me with that is that there are certain obligations that I recognize under law we are somewhat obligated to provide, and one of them would be special education assistance. And so I think it makes sense to have certain buckets of things, and whether that's what we, what those distinctions are, I think that's fair for us to be able to talk about and go through. And then after those buckets to do that allocation. And that's maybe, I think, another way of thinking about this, because I recognize, and I think one of the things we struggled with in the district as a whole is that we have a lot of obligations that are created by state law that are not funded. In the same way that there are a lot of obligations with regards to how we care for students that outside of these funds are just not going to be funded, right? And so to Char's point, I think putting everything into one pool of things, saying this is going to be, we're going to allocate everything per pupil, won't necessarily account for the fact that, like, if we have an increase in students, but almost every single one of them needs some form of special education assistance, there is an obligation that's going to be disproportionately put onto CPS to provide for those students, even though that hasn't changed maybe the number in the same way. Versus some years it may not be that same thing. So there may be factors like that that have also driven where our dollars that are spent each year go. I think the other thing to think about within this is that to a certain extent, and I have learned this because I didn't think about this when my daughter was in preschool, but the reality, because we just kept her there, the reality is that not everybody goes a full school year using the services, right? And so, and some people come mid-year, some people come at different times, and those type of things that all affect the level of our student population. So like the numbers that we've been looking at right now are where they were when Hector and Jen sat down to look at those things. Those numbers may not be the same today, right? And so I think that's one aspect of what we have to also decide in, is that I think by adding buckets of certain things that may become a fixed budget item that we're budgeting, and then the rest is decided by a per pupil or some formula around a per pupil amount, makes more sense to me, in that the per pupil part is the number of students who are getting assistance, and oftentimes may fluctuate throughout a year, whereas some of those fixed costs don't, right? So, and that's the part I think is maybe, for me, would make more sense in a formula. And I don't know if that's really taking exactly number 3, but maybe melting or figuring out the underlying student attached dollar, and option 3 that still leaves the budgeted amount for things like special education, things like quality improvements. Whether that is, that to me, it makes more sense in the allocation, because the parts that are tied to, that are so attached to what a per pupil amount are the things like tuition assistance that may fluctuate throughout the year based on the number of students, based on whether or not the students are going full-time or half-time, and other factors that may change throughout the year. So
we could work within a framework of 3 if that's something your board says you want to do. It would need for it to be equitable, in our view, to account for, just as we account for the quality improvement bucket for our administrative expenses that come from these levy funds, and from yours, which has been $200,000 a year, I think. If that were thrown into this table, I think we could probably get, if 3 is the option you all prefer over 1 remains our preferred option. If 3 is the feedback, you all say go work in something like that, I think we could do it if we included what has historically gone to help cover our administration and what has historically gone to help cover your administration, and then we did the rest on a per pupil for tuition.
Micah, even in that scenario, the overall budget constraint is still 15.56.
Correct.
Yeah, I think couldn't both organizations already do that within what's proposed?
Already do what?
Like if you have a historical spend on staff of X, you want to keep that historical spend on staff as X, you could just take the amount.
Could we do it? Yes. Would the amount of money it would leave us to fund kids be anywhere near adequate? No.
But I just think that we're not going to be able to escape that problem, because as long as the overall budget constraint stays at 15.5, we could name the dollars different things, but it's still going to be the same amount of money that you. Am I on taking some kind of? Am I losing my mind, or is this accurate? So like if you I can't tell if this is a productive use of thing for me to go. Anybody else want to talk? I've talked a lot. Mrs. Weinberg.
I just have a quick question. So just to understand, you were speaking on number 3, and you're stating with what's projected or what's given to us on this particular sheet, the 15.5 would not cover this plus your administration? Is that what you're stating?
No, if you look into that first thing under the table, the 15.5, it then deducts certain things. It deducts the special education money that I guess y'all have budgeted for that. That's not a number we've been a part of. It deducts quality improvement. Then it deducts, and then it gets to 12.8 and says, let's split that up per pupil, in theory, to what should be tuition assistance. What I'm saying is to get to the number that allows us, I'm not talking about total dollar amount. We all understand constraints have to be made. Before you get to the it's not deducting 15.56, it's deducting 12.8. For it to be something that we think is equitable, would have to also deduct out what we spend on administration of these funds historically and what you spend on administration. If those were both dropped down, and I don't know what the number is on the top of my head, and it were turned into 10 something, I don't know what the number is, then I think it's a framework that we could work within. So it would still then be a per pupil based on that. It's just as kind of, this deducts out fixed expenses, which was to Brandon's point, are fixed. We have those too. To do it for special education for you all is to do that for your overhead. To do it equitably, we'd need ours deducted too. And then we could split the rest per pupil.
But ultimately, you're still sticking with option 1 as being your best.
Yes, but we want to get a deal done. So if you all say 3 is, we're willing to work with you within the framework, but 1 remains our preferred option.
Okay, thank you.
So with our last 8 minutes, last comment, Sally, and then we're going to talk about process going forward.
Well, I think it's related to process going forward. I see the clock ticking. The community-based early childhood system is in severe crisis because of inadequate funding, inadequate staffing, and the families not being able to get what they need. We have asked for a higher per pupil, to be allowed to pay a higher per pupil cost with the 10%. Half the year is up. And as we talk about process, I'm very concerned that it's going to take a very long time to get to this agreement. And I'm very concerned about our ability to implement our board-approved budget. And you approved it, but pending the outcome of this agreement. I just want to say we're in sort of a hair on fire situation and want to move really fast.
Thank you. I would like to move very fast as well. Superintendent?
Just a real quick point of clarification so that as we're going back to determine where we go for next steps. So if I'm understanding, I don't want to mispronounce your last name.
Mike is fine.
Okay.
You don't need to use
So if
my
I'm
last name.
understanding what you're proposing or recommending at this point, looking back at the chart that our treasurer provided, the information that we took out essentially was for special education to start with, because there's been an increasing cost with special education. And we provide services that we are strongly supplementing for special education right now. And with the numbers, the way that they're increasing, it looks like within the near future, we're going to have to add additional special education teams. And we know that to be the case. The more students you identify as students that are coming into the system, into any of our systems, the more of those students that are going to need special ed services. So that was one. The quality improvement amount, we recognize that was really important to our CPP team. So if I'm understanding correctly, if you're proposing that we include the administrative costs, the administrative cost right now for Preschool Promise is about $2.5 million compared to, or added with, the administrative cost that we use for this budget is $200,000. So your proposal would be that we would then add that $2.5 million to this, subtract it from the $12 million, and then split the difference of about $10 million.
Per pupil.
Per pupil.
I think that to me feels equitable. I want to look at it, discuss it with our staff. I'm not sure if those numbers, we need some time to look at it. This is
Okay.
the first I've seen this, but certainly I think that would be a fairer way of trying to get this finalized than leaving those items.
The only thing that I would ask for all of us to consider, which is one of the things that our vice president said earlier, because there has been an increased spend over the last several years, it is causing the need for reduction for this year. So when we look at that, and we also want to, as we think about equity, and we do understand that it's important that there is the opportunity for staffing, but one of the things that we heard pretty consistently, and understand why, was the need for flexibility. And so we looked at the opportunity for flexibility. So to the president's point, if we think about where we are and determining whether that 2.5 is the most equitable to add into this number and then do a reduction and then move back to some form of the FTE, number of students that we're actually serving, there has to be some way of maneuvering through that. And so there has to be a thought in terms of how we are able to do those reductions and what is the fair number to put in that total to take out in terms of administration so that we can get to something that also makes it equitable for the students that have the same needs that we serve. Right now, to your point earlier, as I understand from our team, there's already a difference in, and rightfully so, but there's already a difference in the students that are served at the federal poverty level for Cincinnati Preschool Promise versus CPS. And so right now, Cincinnati Preschool Promise is serving students that are 300% above. We're serving students that are 250% above. So already there is a difference in the way that the students are identified. So I would just like for us to consider that as well, but I did think it important that we are clear on what we're asking here, and that would be to deduct the $200,000 that we take for administrative costs and the $2.5 million that Preschool Promise takes for administrative costs.
If those numbers are accurate, then yes, I don't have those numbers in front of me, but if those numbers are accurate, that's certainly a conversation we're going to support. Generally speaking, I think we're all in agreement. We all have to tighten our belts. What we're trying to find is a solution for us to do it equitably, not disproportionately, us having to move from something that has historically been us getting 53% and you all getting 47%, and to move in a direction in which you all get more than the historical average and we all get less than the historical average, I perceive as asking us to tighten our belts disproportionately. We're trying to figure out some solution, however you all want to do it fairly, where to the extent we all have to, make sure we're doing this right and being good fiscal stewards, we're not asked to bear an unfair burden.
Yeah. So in our last, we've gone from 8 minutes to 2 minutes, and I want to end at 11. I don't know of a better way to move forward than what I'm going to propose, though I'm open to alternatives. I just want it to be clear. We've had a good discussion on a series of meaty topics this morning. My sense is, and this is what I want to check with people, that the Preschool Promise team probably wants some time to talk and think and figure out process of like what we've talked about here, and that they would then send to us something that they think that they would be happy with when it comes both to the shared vision and to the master agreement. We then, as our group, we could do this at our next meeting on the 11th, or we could do it at some other time, need to talk about that and decide how we feel about what they're proposing. And then once we had done those two things, we'd see where we are. I'm trying not to propose something radical, but something that's clear. Anybody have any concerns with that way of moving forward? I'm certainly open to alternatives. Kareem.
So I have a question for clarification, and then I have a really quick suggestion. So there has been an underspend by Preschool Promise yearly, correct? Approximately how much has been underspent per year?
Depends on the year, but at 5 out of the 6 years, there was an underspend of their budget.
About how much?
Ranges from 58% to 86% last year. And then one year they had 101.9%.
Okay, so every year they've underspent their budget.
Except for one.
Except for one. Okay, so that also needs to be included in there as well when we're thinking about this. Then on the 11th, is it possible to have CPP come, and I know we have a packed agenda, I know, but can we have some sort of reflection on what you all think around what we've processed here today? It doesn't have to be a presentation, but it should, I guess what I'm trying to get is, can we have concrete dates of movement so that we are progressing? And this is not, hey, we're not having any more meetings, well, let's wait till January. Okay, let's wait till February. Can we have some dates where we have some points of contact that we can progress forward expeditiously with some movement? And I know you all have just now seen this.
Yeah, and so what process would you all?
Well, we can get you a kind of a, I think there's probably still more discussion to be had on funding. The rest of the, I mean, we can get you a draft back that has our 53-47 historical split in it, plus our comments to your blue line that we got last night within a couple days. That's pretty easy. As far as getting this over the finish line, whether it's the small group that has been meeting, or if we need to get a new group together, a group that you all trust to get this over the finish line, we're happy to do that. If you think it needs to be your full board and you want someone to come, I heard you all talk last night about all the big things you got going on the next couple of meetings, and to cap off Carolyn's amazing tenure on the board, and we don't want to
High priority for the 11th.
well, and higher priority for us to get you over to our side of the table, Carolyn, afterwards, which
Yes.
we're very excited about. But we could, I'm happy to advance things with the small group, or if you all have a different small group you want to have, whatever it is,
Yeah.
we're prepared to move.
This is the very last thing, and then we got to break because I know people have other work they got to go do. So do people on the CPS side want to task a small group again with moving this forward, or do they want to keep the discussions at this level? Eve,
I would give it to the administration.
Carolyn,
I agree.
I feel that I think the same thing.
Give it to the administration.
Okay, that would accelerate this dramatically. And so just for clarity, can we just align on what that means? So like Superintendent, could you say, like, if you were to take that from Eve, what would the next couple weeks look like? And I just want us all to be on the same page of what that is.
So I think, to be honest, we have a couple of weeks that we're working with before everybody goes into what we're dealing with for the holidays. So I just want to be realistic in terms of that. I think what we would want to know administratively, we're sharing kind of what we believe is the best proposal. At this point, we would need to have that feedback from CPP so that we could then come back together. And that's kind of where the negotiation process would continue through that, with the understanding that we all have a desire to get this to closure. I just want to make sure, though, that that is what we really want us to do, because once we do that and we start that process, we do want to be able to come to closure, because all of our teams will be taking a lot of time to try to make sure that we're getting what we need for our children.
Yeah, so I think does that plan, I think that plan has support from Carolyn, from Eve, from me, from Brandon, Mary, Kareem. I mean, Mary, yes.
So
Yes.
I just have a question. If just the administrative, that's fine. If you all are going to have board members on the team as well, then I think we need to have some representation. That's just my personal opinion. But if it's just your administrative teams working through this, then that's fine.
I think the proposal is just the administrative teams.
With legal counsel, treasurers, we're prepared to try to move forward with that and see if we can get to a good document.
Great. Thank you, everybody. Last comment is from Mr. Craig, and then we're going to break.
It just is a personal point of privilege. Today is Ben's birthday.
Come on, man.
Happy birthday.
Look, getting this done would be a fabulous birthday gift. So thank you all. Having no other meeting business before us, to declare a meeting adjourned.